If everyone can try to find a seat, we want to just get our wonderful morning started. Good morning, everybody. I'm Gina DeSalvo, the Director of Tufts Parents Giving Program, your host for this weekend. We're so happy to have so many of you here with us from all over. Registration is still open across the street at Sophia Gordon Hall. If you haven't picked up your registration packet, we will also have, that's where you can pick up your brochure to find out where everything is happening throughout campus for the rest of the day today. Just a few quick housekeeping notes, just in case of an emergency. Just take note of the exits on the front, at the front and the back of the auditorium, and there's also some up in the balcony. And please, no eating, smoking, or drinking in here today. And if you could take a moment to just silence your phones. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you our president, Dr. Tony Monaco.
Well, thank you, Gina. It's wonderful to see so many parents and families here for this weekend. I understand we have another record, 2,500 parents and families and other siblings who are here from all over the U.S. and as far as China, France, Mexico, and Qatar. This weekend is a chance for you to experience campus like your children do. I hope you'll take all advantage of these great opportunities. I know yesterday you discussed academics with Provost Harris and Deans Glazer, Q, and Solomon, and also heard from Greg Victory about all the work we're doing around careers here at the university. I hope some of you had a chance yesterday to be at the opening of the Science and Engineering Complex, our newest addition, the first real science building on this campus since the 1930s. It's both for teaching and research, and being up on the top floor looking out over Boston or over the athletic fields almost entices me back into the lab. This morning we're going to have notable faculty speakers after this session, as well as those of you who are interested in student life and what we're implementing following the investigations and report of the committee. Our Dean, Mary Pat McMahon, will be speaking afterwards as well. There's lots of athletic events, including a football game, as well as art performances just outside of Cohen. You'll see the stage out there as you exit. That'll be happening later this afternoon, and it looks like the weather is going to hold for us. Now, I wanted to share with you a brief update as the year begins. Many of you know who were here with your first year students. We had a beautiful day for matriculation and a very, very strong academic class, as well as all the other types of activities they're interested in. We had over 21,000 applicants, another record, and again, really excited to welcome all of you to their first year. This beautiful day of matriculation comes after a summer of discontent. We had to deal with a lot of the racist and anti-Semitic messages that came out of Charlottesville. We're producing a series of programming called Bridging Differences this year on campus, trying to get our students to engage with us on ways in which we can get students with different opinions to reach across divides and to discuss their differences and learn from each other. We didn't go right off the mark with programming. We want to engage the students in the first couple weeks of this semester on how they think we should be bridging differences to get their input. We've been dealing with a lot of the things coming out of executive orders from the Trump administration around the immigration ban or DACA students, providing legal support to our students, faculty, and staff that are in these categories, but also fighting back a lot of legal challenges that we've put forward with other universities alongside the Massachusetts Attorney General's office to challenge legally many of these executive orders. As I tell my senior staff, it's a time in this country where I think there is a lack of moral leadership, and many of our citizens are looking to other leaders, and particularly in higher education, to provide some of that leadership. And you'll continue to hear statements from my office trying to find the right messages. On the academic initiatives, we're very proud to see that Tufts was ranked by Nature as 11th in the world in innovation. Also by, thank you. This is a measure of how much our faculty's research is cited by third-party patents. How is it as a foundation to things that are being patented elsewhere, as a measure of how innovative our work here at the university is. We also ranked 38th in the world by another ranking by Reuters for a similar innovation index, so doing very well on that front. As many of you know, computer science is now our largest major at Tufts. It eclipsed international relations last year. It's had a growth of over 350% in the last few years. It's put a lot of pressure on the classes and the work we need to do to hire new staff. But at the same time, we feel that this is an area where we need to invest more. We're thinking and planning a new data science initiative. It's going to be a research and educational center for the entire university. And we'll be beginning a major or minor next year in data science run by both arts science and engineering. It'll also offer research support across all of our campuses to help train students, postdocs, and faculty to be able to use these tools in the way they do research on many grand challenges. We also hired a bridge professor in cybersecurity. Susan Landau has joined us, who will have an appointment between the Fletcher School, who's interested in cybersecurity policy, and the computer science department, and we're teaching a lot more classes in this area. We are also continuing to invest in the arts here at Tufts. As many of you know, we integrated the School of the Museum of Fine Arts last year, and there's collaborations between those faculty and faculty here on this campus, and our Boston campus is going very well, and I'm sure you'll hear more in the subsequent talk by Dean Bauer. We also continue to push the frontiers as a student-centered research university. Yesterday, I was lucky enough to spend some time down in the Adekman Arts Center, where our undergraduates who were summer scholars, that are students who do independent research over the summer funded by the provost's office, to work with faculty in a range of areas across all the disciplines. And they had all their work up on posters. It was very exciting for me to wander around and interact with them and hear about all the great work they're doing. Much of them are going to continue that work during the academic year, leading to significant publications or a senior thesis. I'm pleased to say that we're engaged with a donor who is going to help us fund an increased summer scholars program that would actually extend over 2 summers, so students could get involved even after their sophomore year, and also include both an international component and a leadership component. And you'll probably hear more about that as we announce it later this semester. We continue our work with the Mental Health Task Force. This is a group of faculty and staff who are working with me and the co-chair Paul Summergrad from the Tufts Medical Center Department of Psychiatry on thinking about how we can provide better services and revisit our policies around mental health, not only for our undergraduates, but also for our graduate and professional students. The number of students who require these services is very high, and we want to make sure that we maximize their potential here and help them with these issues. You will also hear, if you're interested, from Mary Pat McMahon on how we're implementing the recommendations around the Student Life Review Committee. Many of you know we had issues that arose with hazing, in particular in Greek life. We've investigated those and made determinations, but I also asked a committee to look at student life more generally, to understand how we could provide better social spaces, diversity and inclusion in the way student life is run, and to think about how we can get ahead on the hazing issues in particular. So the report is out, and Mary Pat McMahon will be describing a range of implementation. I will be chairing that personally, the Implementation Steering Committee, to make sure that we continue to make progress in this area. On the academic side, I mentioned the Science and Engineering Center. It's the second academic building we've opened during my time here, the first being the Collaborative Learning and Innovation Complex further down on Boston Ave. Inside the Science and Engineering Center, we had the grand opening of the Allen Discovery Center around the work of Mike Levin, one of our biologists. This is $10 million in funding over a 4-year period from Paul Allen. There were only 2 awards made. The other was Stanford. That's Tufts on the West Coast, as we say. But we're very pleased to be able to be noted for that innovative research and a chance to actually win another $10 million in 4 years' time. And I hope our students will be engaged with that as well. We're planning a third academic building when the Green Line extension comes to Tufts at College and Ballston Ave. We'll be building, through the generosity of Bill and Joyce Cummings and the Cummings Foundation, a building which will house new teaching and classroom spaces, interaction spaces, and faculties of economics, computer science, the new data science program, and mathematics, as well as some other programs, will join together in that area so we can house our kind of quantitative faculties for better interaction. So that'll be very exciting in the years to come. We are also continuing work on expanding our housing with a grand renovation of Miller and Houston. For any alumni who are in the audience, Houston looks exactly as it did if you lived there many years ago, but we are going to be upgrading it for accessibility as well as social spaces on all the floors. We also continue with a wood-framed house strategy where we hope to create villages near and on campus of houses we own, which are currently housing administrative and academic units. They'll be moved out, and we're going to renovate these for upperclassmen so we can get them closer to campus and engaged with the community here better. We're starting in Medford, but this will eventually shift to Somerville, and we hope by the end of that to create 300 beds, which will increase the number of students on campus significantly. This November, we'll be launching the public phase of our fundraising campaign. We'll have a launch at the Museum of Fine Arts, a very big ask of our alumni and donors of $1.5 billion, but we're well along the way, having raised over $540 million in the silent phase. This campaign is to support primarily the transformational experiences we want our students and faculty to have at the university, to support faculty research, teaching, and innovation, and to think about how ways we can, as a university, positively impact our local and global communities and the challenges they face. It will allow us to accelerate Tufts' progress. Our trajectory continues to rise, and to support exceptional students and faculty. You'll hear more about that as the launch occurs in November. This morning, it's my pleasure to hand over to our keynote speaker, who represents the very best of Tufts faculty. Nancy Bauer is the Dean of the School of the Museum of Fine Arts, a Dean of Academic Affairs in Arts and Sciences since 2012, and a Professor of Philosophy. She's also the mother of 2 Jumbo alumni and a current Tufts junior, and she's interested in what philosophy is and what role it plays or should play in everyday human life. She explores issues including gender, film, and the history of philosophy itself. She will discuss the close interrelationship of science, art, and philosophy, and the importance of the liberal arts education in the 21st century. Please join me in welcoming Nancy Bauer to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tony. I'm so delighted to be here as a faculty member and as a parent. I also want to thank all the people who have put this whole weekend together. I want to make sure that my slides are ready to go. Let's see. See if I can get some technical help from upstairs. There we go. That's the wrong one. Do I have to start there? Maybe I'll start there. Okay, that's fine. This is my second slide, actually. So I want to stress, you're seeing this slide because I want to stress to you how much I know about Tufts, not from being a faculty member or even a dean, but from just being the parent of 3 children who have gone there. And so I'm now showing you, let me see if I can get this to happen. Hold on, sorry. Figure out how to fix this. There we go. Can you help me? Sorry. There we go. That's the first slide. Now we're all set. Okay, there are my kids again. I'm showing you Michael, who graduated in 2013, Eleanor, who graduated in 2016, and this is Max, who's currently a junior. This person here is my husband, Mark Richard, who was at Tufts for most of his career, but very foolishly defected to Harvard about 7 years ago. He's back today, and he's feeling really the pain of it. You can tell that this is an old photo. Max, as I said, is a junior, but it's epic in our family because it shows what happens when I ask folks to smile. Because all of the people here, except for one, I won't say which one, are tone deaf, we tend to refer to this photo as the Richard family singers photo. And oh, by the way, there is a fourth child. This is Annalisa. She is a natural rebel, so she attended Tufts only during one summer session, and so we, as you can see, put her in the dunce corner. This talk is informed by my experience as a parent, but also, of course, by my experience working at Tufts, and more precisely, it's informed by all three roles that I'm playing now at the university, and so I'm going to talk about them a little bit. The first is my role of being a full-time faculty member, which I started on September 1st, 1998, so I'm currently in my 20th year here. My areas of research specialization are offbeat, considering that I was trained in what's known in the biz as analytic philosophy. Now that's a highly technical, highly esoteric form of linguistic analysis. I have to tell you, I really like logic. But over time, while I was in graduate school in philosophy, I became more and more concerned about the demographics of my profession. It was overwhelmingly male and white and middle or upper class. And it seemed to me that there was very little space left for other kinds of people to have a say. And so I started thinking in particular about what gender is and why the world remains so sexist. These days, I'm most well known in philosophy for my work on the thinker Simone de Beauvoir, the author of the 1949 magnum opus, The Second Sex, which I've argued is the most important book ever written on the topic of what it means to be a gendered human being. I also do work in 4 other areas of philosophy: philosophy of language, existentialism and phenomenology, philosophical method, and in particular, in that area, the question of whether philosophy can make progress. I argue no, that it's not a field that makes progress, except in a very particular way, but that's for another day. And also philosophy and film. I have published 3 books, Simone de Beauvoir, Philosophy and Feminism, the fabulously titled How to Do Things with Pornography. And just a couple of weeks ago, this collection of papers on Simone de Beauvoir just appeared. It has papers on Beauvoir from a large variety of people from around the world. It's also the first volume on a woman philosopher in a very large and prestigious series, so I'm really proud of that. In addition to that, of course, I've been teaching for a long time, and I've taught courses at both the graduate and the undergraduate levels. Pretty much everything I've ever written starts in conversations with my students at Tufts. I've taught my course in feminist philosophy, in particular, 20 times, and every single time I teach that class, I learn something brand new from the students I'm teaching, and it finds its way into the next incarnation of the class. So for the past 5 years, we're skipping to 2012, July 9th, that was the exact date, I've served as Dean of Academic Affairs for Arts and Sciences. And in this role, I've supervised, at one time or another, 17 of the 26 Arts and Sciences departments and 14 of our 21 interdisciplinary programs. This is why I look much older than I did 5 years ago. And by the way, I'm smiling. Oh, and most faithfully, as you can see at the bottom, the School of the Museum of Fine Arts, or for short, I'll call it the SMFA. And by the way, the reason I am smiling in this photo is that it was taken by Alonzo here, actually, on the 3rd day of my being dean, and I had no idea what I was getting into, and I had yet to be taken down 41 notches or so. Okay, so I haven't forgotten that I am committed to talking to you about why science needs art and why both need philosophy. We're going to get there. But for you to understand what I mean when I talk about art, I want to give you a sense of what the SMFA has taught me about that subject. And then to do that, I want to say something about the SMFA, which is a unique school. Many people use the word unique with a modifier, like it's the most unique, it's really unique. Unique means the only one of its kind. So I'm going to say the SMFA is unique in that classic sense. You can see why my family can't stand talking to me, because I'm constantly corrected. All right, so this is a map of a chunk of Cambridge and much of downtown Boston. You can see MIT right there, right above the Charles River. And the SMFA itself consists of two buildings. There, where you see that red dot and the blue dot. The red dot one is right on the Fens, hence the name, the Fenway of that area. And the Fens is that big green swath right near it. And as you can see, it's also right across the street from the Museum of Fine Arts, which is that green dot that I've put there. It's also a block away from the Isabel Stewart Gardner Museum, so it's in a really great location. The blue building is a converted taxi depot on St. Alphonsus Street in the Mission Hill section of Boston. And that building is filled with studios for our Master of Fine Arts students, our post-baccalaureate students, and our senior thesis students. The red building is where most of our heavy equipment and shops live, and where most of our classes happen. So I want to convey to you what I've learned in my year plus in these buildings, and in order to do that, I'm going to give you a little bit of history about the SMFA. Bear with me. The next slide is very fuzzy. I'm sorry, I didn't realize this until we put it on this enormous screen. So the SMFA opened up for business on January 2nd, 1877, which was just a few months after the Museum of Fine Arts Boston opened, in this building, which at the time was in Copley Square. The SMFA at that time was called the School of Drawing and Painting, and as common when there's a relationship between a museum and an art school, the art school was in the basement, where there's all that natural light. In 1901, after expanding its course offerings to architectural design and a number of other fields, the school changed its name to the School of the Museum of Fine Arts. And in 1909, it moved with the museum to its present location on Huntington Avenue in Boston. The school, however, did not occupy even the basement of this building, except for a few years off and on in small places. Instead, the museum built a one-story building that was called the Barracks, because it was made of wood and concrete, very grim, and it was meant to be temporary, to just last a year. And 20 years later, this building was built across the street, so the school was in that temporary building for 20 years. The history of the museum school has always reflected the city of Boston in a profound and complex way. When it comes to art, Boston has had a long history of tension between its sort of proper Brahmin aesthetic conservative tendencies, where the inclination is to play things safe, and on the other hand, between the tendency relentlessly to seek to break all the molds. It's what philosophers might call a Hegelian struggle. At the SMFA, the disruptors always eventually win out, and the school undergoes what Hegel calls a sublation. That's when the sort of ordinary way of doing things is completely disrupted, and the whole mess is brought into another whole framework or way of thinking. And what happens at the SMFA is that its history always comes with it, but is completely regenerated or cast in a different light. Okay, so let's skip ahead a few years. In 1944, before the SMFA and Tufts had any kind of relationship at all, a few students started taking classes at the museum school, and the reason was that the museum was desperate for money. So they went to Tufts and said, we would be happy for you to pay us to teach some of your students. So 14 kids went over there. They took a 4-credit class, a first-year class in art. The next year, in 1945, a Master of Arts in Teaching was established, and that's still a signature program of the school, and it's always actually been run by Tufts. And this program allowed SMFA students who were in it to get federal financial aid. You see, the school was not accredited by our regional accreditor, and in order to get financial aid, you have to be accredited by that accreditor. The attitude at the SMFA was that the training it gave, was so good that its graduates did not need an accredited degree. Instead, they got a piece of paper called a studio diploma. That diploma is held by some of the greatest artists in the world, and in fact, the program still exists at the SMFA. But in 1956, the school succumbed to the need to get dollars from the federal government. And it struck a deal with Tufts to award the BFA to its students and to offer them the liberal arts credits they'd need for such a degree. So Tufts was able, already being accredited, to just add the BFA to its portfolio and then to arrange for SMFA students to get it. A collaborative Master of Fine Arts degree came along a few years later. In the 60s, SMFA started sending artists to teach introductory studio courses on the Medford campus, mostly in drawing, painting, and photography, so that Tufts students at least had some art to take here. And that arrangement stuck around pretty much until the story I'm about to tell you. By the way, here are some Tufts students from the 1950s. As you can probably tell, they're from the dental school. It's all I could find on the internet. So it's possible that at the time they were not taking any courses at the art school. All right, then the fateful year. In 1968, there was a sea change at the SMFA that everyone at the school still talks about on a regular basis. Dean William Bagnall came in and revolted against his own administration. He tore down all the power structures and spread the power across all of the constituencies. So the trustees of the MFA had a third, the faculty had a third, and the students had a third. With that mix, the departments were all dissolved. There was no longer a painting department or a sculpture department or a metals department. And the faculty ranks as well were dissolved. Everyone was equal. It was 1968. Bagnall got rid of majors and distribution requirements, and every course was an elective. There were no required courses, in fact, at all. More than 1,000 flowers bloomed, as you can imagine. Grades went out the window and were replaced by review boards. These were, and still are, end of semester intense sessions involving a student artist, all the artist's work, 2 student critics, and 2 faculty critics. So the objective of the boards is to give each student very personalized guidance about what to do next, about how to move ahead, and also very personalized guidance about how to reflect on their own work and assess it in terms of its promises and its failures. Students are also encouraged to read certain books and papers and to go look at various artworks and to make themselves familiar with things they might not have thought about before. It's an absolutely amazing, awesome process. I personally think that we should have it everywhere in education. And again, not much has changed since the time that I just described, and that, I am going to suggest, is a very good thing. So now let's fast forward to the summer of 2012. I was a brand new dean, and the SMFA, and that's the main building pictured above, which is at 230 the Fenway. That SMFA had been a tiny part of my portfolio, or was a tiny part of my portfolio, sorry. Specifically, from the beginning of my time as an academic dean at Tufts, I was responsible for the Visual and Critical Studies department at the SMFA because the faculty in that department were actually hired and employed by Tufts and always had been. I had a lot of experience with SMFA students by that point because for years they had been coming to Medford to take their liberal arts and sciences requirements, and I tended to have a good representation of SMFA students in my class. They're interested in philosophy and they're interested in film, and I taught a lot of classes on those subjects. They're also interested in feminism. And I knew that Tufts students also went down to the museum school to take studio art classes, or they stayed on this campus to take those classes from the artists who were here. What I did not know when I became a dean in 2012 is that plans were in the making at the SMFA for the school to separate from both the museum and from Tufts, and to go it alone as an independently accredited entity able to award its own degrees. So there's a lot of work to be done to get it to that point, and I became closely involved in that work. However, by the summer of 2015, the museum and the school decided to make a U-turn, and rather than seek total independence, the school would become part of a larger Boston area university or college. Because I had been so closely involved with the school during its exploration of independence, my colleagues in the Tufts administration turned to me, who was a very low-level dean, and said, "What do you think we should do with this school? Should we decide to make a bid for it?" My first inclination was to say, but instead I said, yes, we should definitely do that. And we should also refrain, said I, from turning it into a regular old art school, one that has a skill-building year followed by the choice of a major that would end up having an obvious vocational outcome, for example, graphic design or video game design or fashion design. To my mind, the SMFA was more like Tufts, a liberal arts, a nimble, medium-sized liberal arts institution in many respects than it was like even the best standard art school. It's all about studying the world both visually and in the usual liberal arts and sciences way, by reading and doing various kinds of experiments, and then expressing one's research and considered views in the form of something public and open to criticism. The difference is that the critics aren't just one's teachers or one's peers, but potentially the whole world. We don't just put our artworks into peer-reviewed journals. And the mark of success wasn't a grade or an obvious next step in the curriculum. It was learning how to absorb criticism from one's peers and one's teachers, to bear up, to move on, to continue to make art. It seemed obvious to me that both schools would benefit from a closer relationship. Tufts' bounty as a world-class liberal arts institution would be the artist's oyster, and it has been. And they would teach us how to see, literally and figuratively, what we were doing. In its wisdom, the senior administration, thank you, Tony, and the Board of Trustees agreed, and I am incredibly proud of an institution that, in this day and age, chose to make such a bold statement about the value of art in our time. On the ground, we spent about 6 months negotiating with the Museum of Fine Arts, and a preliminary agreement was reached right before Christmas in 2015, and a definitive agreement was signed in March of 2016, and all of a sudden it was July 1st, 2017, my first day of work at the SMFA. In this picture, I am wearing a Wonder Woman outfit, or the accoutrements of a Wonder Woman outfit that one of our wonderful faculty members gave me a few months into the job. This is obviously before I embellished my Play One on TV art school dean look with the hair and the glasses and everything. Seriously, enhancing my art dean cred was crucial because on the same date that I became the dean of the museum school, my dean of academic affairs portfolio, which I still had, changed to include all of the arts departments on the Medford campus. Now, in addition to all the metrics we discussed while negotiating with the MFA during that interim period of time, there were numerous signs that this marriage between the SMFA and Tufts was in the stars. As you all know, Tufts' mascot is Jumbo the elephant, and this is the formidable sculpture that was installed on our main quad just a few weeks before the Museum of Fine Arts asked us what we thought about acquiring the SMFA. Meanwhile, this fiberglass replica of a famous sculpture by SMFA alum Catherine Weems, and by the way, her graduation date is 1922, epitomizes what the SMFA is all about. The original sculpture that this is based on is one of two that you might know that are famously sit in front of the biological laboratories at Harvard. The difference is that our Bessie is cooler than the one at Harvard because it's routinely decked out in wild costumes, and it is very welcoming to all visitors, and it is in cahoots with our custodial staff who constantly have to deal with things that shouldn't be put on Bessie. But here's the big story, the kismet. Both of these animals are pachyderms. See that? Now, of course, the past year hasn't been 100% easy. Tufts and the SMFA are like newlyweds in an arranged marriage. Some days, the differences in culture are enough to make us wonder if we were right to make the leap. But there are other times, like Valentine's Day this past February, when I received this print, this incredible piece from my colleague at the SMFA, artist Peter Scott, who's amazing. He's an amazing teacher, and he's as steadfast a mentor to students as I've ever seen. I wish I could show you the real thing, which is amazing, as I keep saying. It's a really moving piece of work, just wonderful. Okay, I'm tempted to show you a lot more images of the intellectually rich and provocative work that our students and faculty make, but at the same time, I'm keen to acknowledge the opportunity costs for Tufts of acquiring this art school. Sure, it says something about Tufts' values that it boasts not only a wide range of graduate professional schools, medical, dental, vet, nutrition, and so on, and also a funky art school, but there are other ways to make statements about our values. The key questions are whether the SMFA enhances Tufts and whether being part of Tufts is a good thing, really, at the end of the day for the SMFA. So here's where I'm finally going to start saying something about science, art, and philosophy. And for reasons that should become clear, I'm going to jump right in with philosophy. Ready? In the Western tradition, at least since Plato, there's always been a deep suspicion about art, and particularly its relationship to truth. The worry is that to the extent that art plays on our emotions, which are very powerful, of course, it pulls us away from the rational and the reasonable and incites us to irrationality. Plato himself expresses this concern in two iconic places in his work, The Republic. The first is the famous allegory of the cave, which we find in chapter 7, or what is commonly referred to as Book 7. So I'm going to walk you through what the allegory of the cave. Pardon my really bad PowerPoint skills. In Book 7, Plato famously asks us to imagine an underground cave, at the bottom of which is a group of prisoners, and they're shackled at their necks so that they can't move their heads, and they are consigned, therefore, always to be facing that wall, which is, did I hit the right thing? Trying to use a dot, but I guess I can't. The wall that's right at the bottom of the screen. Behind these prisoners, Plato says, we should imagine a ledge, and on that ledge, people who are standing behind it are manipulating everyday objects. And they're making corresponding sound effects. Of course, a tomato and a cucumber or whatever that is don't have sound effects, but the idea is that if there were if you manipulated something that made a shadow of a lion on the wall, you would make a lion's roar, for example. Behind the ledge, says Plato, there's this huge fire, which makes those shadows. The light from the fire casts the shadows of the objects onto the wall that the prisoners were looking at. And so Plato's point is these prisoners will think that reality is what they are looking at on the wall in front of them. They will think that those shadows represent what the world is. So now Plato says, imagine that the captors of these prisoners take one of them and unshackle her and encourage her to turn around and set her back to the wall and just look in the other direction. At first, Plato speculates the strong light from the fire would blind this person and she would attempt to turn back to the familiar. She would rather go back to looking at the shadows. But if she were courageous and curious enough, she might not turn back, and gradually her eyes would adjust to the light from the fire. If, Plato says, and I'll explain the numbers in a bit, if this person then walks away from her fellow prisoners, she will recognize that what she previously took to be real was actually just a mere representation of the ultimate reality, which is the wall, the fire, and the stuff being manipulated on top of the wall by the people who are back there. Plato, though, now imagines that the freed prisoner is encouraged by the captors to walk past the ledge, the objects and the fire, toward the mouth of the cave. Once again, the prisoner will be loath to leave behind what she takes to be real, and her eyes will be hurt by the brightness of the light outside, and she will be overcome with a strong urge to turn back. But again, if she's blessed with the right temperament, she will bring herself to leave the comfort of the cave. And when her eyes adjust to the outside light, which is even stronger than the light of the fire, and even the light going up to the outside, the former prisoner will discover that what she previously took to be real, the peoples moving the objects on the ledge in front of the fire, was just so much play acting, a copying of the real world, which means that what she was originally looking at on the wall was a copy of a copy. Now, eventually, Plato suggests the prisoner may discover in herself the desire and the fortitude to look up and behold the sun, which for Plato stands for the ultimate reality, what he called the forms. Plato thinks that, or believed that the things of this world, the things you find at what I'm identifying as level 3, the things of our everyday lives, that is, are themselves copies of those forms. Sometimes people call them Platonic ideas. They're accessible at level 4 only to people who are the best trained in thinking, which, surprise, is the philosophers. The forms are the essence, the epitome of what any generic thing is. They are like the essence of a tomato. They are the epitomizing tomato. They are the only thing that's real, and to be a philosopher, Plato thought, is to wish to commune with the forms, or with truth, capital T, justice, capital J, beauty, capital B, and so on. So this means that from the point of view of the philosopher, what the prisoners at level 1 are viewing is just a copy of a copy of a copy. This very provocative image of Plato suggests that prisoners in the cave, that is to say, all of us who are not a very specific type of philosopher, are fixated on the light and shadows that the world casts, and that what we need to do is to think and live truly by mustering up the courage to turn around and walk away from that wall. Let me put this in a more provocative way, which is what I do when I teach philosophy and film. Plato is very directly exhorting us to walk out on the feature presentation, because his prisoners, hypnotized by those shadows that are playing on the walls, are really, as you can see, watching films, right? That's what those shadows on the wall are like. And as you can see, watching films is 3 levels of reality removed from the real truth. So to watch a movie is to watch shadows and shadows of the real thing. So the worst level is art. Now, in the 10th book of the Republic, Plato argues not just that the representations of the things that people make are 3 degrees removed from what's really real, he also argues that art is dangerous insofar as it is, by its nature, Republic 10, this is in. Art is dangerous because by its nature, it not only distorts reality, but it's seductive. It plays on our emotions. Using Homer's poetry as his main example, Plato observes that art is always about some boring, mundane matter, like erotic love, or valiant war heroes, or greed. At the same time, it fascinates us, enthralls us, grips us, moves us. As such, we are the prisoners of art, no better than the shackled people at the bottom of the cave. Now, notoriously, if you know anything about Plato's views on art, in his ideal republic, which is spelling out in this book, he wanted to ban art on the grounds that it entices people away from the hard work of philosophy and drugs them into contentment with mere shadows of reality. So at its founding moment, Western philosophy in effect defines itself over and against art, as though delimiting itself by pointing to exactly what it is not. Now, of course, many contemporary philosophers of art are not Platonists. But in my opinion, many of us spend too much time trying to pin down the things that can't be pinned down without much illuminating human beings' attraction to and investment in art. For example, there's a ton of writing in the philosophy of art on the metaphysical question of whether beauty inheres in things in the world or is something that people impose on it, whether it's in the eye of the beholder. And that there's also a corresponding question about whether we can come up with any criteria that might fit the bill for us to imagine that somehow beauty is objective. My view is that debating these kinds of questions may be engaging for people who find themselves seduced by philosophy, but not of much value for the real world. Having written a book on pornography, I am all the time asked by random people in the street how to distinguish erotica from porn, a question on which my fellow contemporary philosophers have spilled an enormous amount of ink. My view is that it's a waste of time to try to identify once and for all definitive criteria for distinguishing between erotica and porn, or for that matter, distinguishing art from kitsch. Note that I'm not claiming that there are no differences. What I'm saying is that one has to judge these matters in the contexts in which they naturally arise, falling back on one's perception, experiences, tastes, and capacity for serious conversation with other people, without the safety net of a comprehensive theory. We may be shackled to a cave watching movies, but that doesn't mean that we can't look and see and listen and talk and think. To me, what philosophy is good for is developing that capacity for serious conversation that I just mentioned, along with a capacity for questioning the terms in which we experience things, for noticing the unusual and the uncanny and the not quite what we expected in the everyday. And it's also developing a capacity for taking and receiving criticism in all senses of that term, of bad ideas, of good ideas, of art. Philosophy is about noticing that the words we use to describe something can actually determine what that thing is in the world, as when, to use an example from this past week's news, we speak for decades of starlets and casting couches without really thinking about it and without using a word that we're now willing to use, namely sexual assault. Let me try to make sure that I've been clear. I've claimed that philosophical theorizing, which I see as a determination to commune with the ideal forms in some Platonic sky, is not the road to truth. But I've also claimed that developing a philosophical sensibility can help us achieve a sea change in our everyday sense of how things are, from the sort of quaint and cute casting couch to the notion of sexual assault, in the example I used. Other things besides philosophical texts can, of course, help us achieve the same kind of shift in perception, and sometimes changing our focus is just a matter of determination. So here we have, just to make clear what I'm talking about, a famous figure used by Gestalt psychologists, the Necker cube. You can probably will yourself to see the line that the arrow is pointing to as part of the front face of the cube and then part of the back face, right? You don't do anything. A shift just happens. Or maybe you will yourself to try to make it, and it might or it might not. There's also this famous figure where you can see the arrow pointing either at a duck's bill or a rabbit's ears. And there are tons and tons of these figures, of course. What I want to suggest is that scientific progress also relies, and I don't have time to make the full argument. I do speak about this in other things I've published, but I'll throw it out there for you. Scientific progress relies on radical shifts in perspective. That is, the ones that philosophy at its best is always trying to induce. These shifts in perspective that allow us to make scientific progress can result from slow, painstaking trial and error in a laboratory. But, and here's my main point, they can just as well arise from what one comes to understand outside the laboratory, and sometimes when you least expect them. So here is Ben Wolf. He is an amazing microbiologist here at Tufts, whom I had the honor of hiring as an assistant professor when I was still dean of the biology department. That's Ben in his lab on the left. And what you're seeing on the right are some fabulous aged cheeses that Ben assembled and photographed. And And both of these images you'll find on his Tufts web page, and, which you can Google, of course. They're there because Ben is an expert not only in microbiomes, that is the microbial communities found everywhere on Earth, including fatefully in our guts, but also in aged cheeses and many other kinds of fermented foods. In fact, Ben studies the ecology and evolution of microbial communities and food systems and is an expert cheese gourmand. He writes for the very best cheese publications. He's the person who does all the lectures for Formaggio's Kitchen, which is the best cheesemonger in Boston. He also teaches a very, very cool advanced undergraduate course in the microbiology of food. And I'm drawing Ben to your attention because he's interested in his interest in the aesthetics of food, what it tastes like, how to create a cheese that has a certain kind of flavor as measured by many different characteristics of the gourmand. That informs his scientific work and vice versa. Ben is a highly successful early career scientist, in part, I am arguing, because his laboratory interests intersect and overlap with his aesthetic ones. Each perspective, scientific and aesthetic, informs the other and thereby potentially opens up new routes of progress in both. And also, Ben is just an awesome, awesome human being. And here is Floor van de Velde, an SMFA artist who holds a Master of Science from MIT in Art, Culture, and Society. She is a very, very excellent programmer. Floor creates immersive sculptures and installations that cause the people who see them to have uncanny experiences. You can't imagine it here. This is an absolutely enormous sculpture, and as you walk through it, this installation, it's quite amazing. To quote Floor's website, she explores the limits of structures and systems of spatial logic and the juncture at which they break down to open up new visual and poetic possibilities. I love that. When I arrived at the SMFA in 2015, one of the first things that I did, what I was forced to do, I was confronted with the problem that Google was trying to lure Floor from our school with a salary 3 times what I could pay her. But she wanted to stay because she wanted to be in a place where she could make and teach art and work with our students. Both Ben Wolf and Floor van de Velde explore science through aesthetics and art through science. They feed both the right and the left sides of the brain, if you'd like to put it that way. And here is Ethan Murrow, who happens to be the grandson of the famous broadcaster Edgar R. Murrow, who helped bring down McCarthyism in the 1950s and whose papers and artifacts now reside at Tufts in our digital collections and archives and also in the Fletcher School. Ethan is standing in front of the 40-foot mural that he drew entirely with Sharpie pens on the entrance level wall just inside the the Institute of Contemporary Art in Boston in 2015. You see that sort of ship thing at the top of this. This is a detail of it. This is, remember, absolutely enormous. In real life, it's bigger than what you see, than the size it is on the screen. It allows you to see the large aircraft carrier-sized boat carrying St. Paul's Cathedral into the ocean. Remember that every single thing you see here is achieved only by the use of regular old Sharpie pens. And again, you really have to see Ethan's work in person to experience the uncanniness of life-likeness and scale of his work, which stands in eerie juxtaposition to the preposterous subject matter. It's as though we are seeing all aspects of a Gestalt figure at the same time. A few weeks ago, the SMFA, the MFA, and Tufts threw a big party to celebrate the opening of our second year of collaboration. Hundreds of people attended, and I felt the way that you feel at your own wedding when you see your best friend from middle school just having a fabulous time with your great aunt, Bessie. In fact, I felt so great that I went home and I thought a lot about why I felt so great. Was it just that it was fun to see people I knew from both campuses interacting? And as I thought about it, what occurred to me is that I saw at the event just how huge the potential is for something magical to happen at Tufts. All universities have faculty who practice and teach the arts and who do science, whether it's social science or not, or natural science. But not all universities are right-sized for easy cross-university collaboration in the way that Tufts is. And the novelty of the SMFA as part of Tufts exponentially increases the likelihood of that cross-pollination. I keep a list of all the research and teaching collaborations that are happening between the SMFA and the rest of Tufts, and I've already got more than 100 items on the list, substantive things, grants that people have gotten together, papers that people are publishing. What we are doing with this collaboration is opening up the opportunity for our community to reimagine what's possible in the world. And to a philosopher, that is as good as it gets. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your time here today.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Nancy. That was absolutely riveting. I couldn't stop. I wanted to see more. Pick more of your amazing art, too. So this concludes this session right here for the keynote. Next is Jeff Berry. He will be giving his presentation right here in Cohen. And the rest of your sessions can be found in your brochure. They're all laid out down this, down Talbot. So thank you so much and enjoy the rest of the day.